everyone. Today we're going to talk about 3.4, the Marshall Court. This is your title for your notebook. The objective for today is, in order for the student to evaluate the importance of the Marshall Court, you will analyze 3 cases. For today, on the left-hand side of your notebook, we're going to talk about John Marshall. Marbury versus Madison is the first case that we're going to talk about with judicial review. The second case is McCulloch versus Maryland. And the third case is Gibbons versus Ogden in the Supremacy Clause. So a few fun facts about the Supreme Court. First question, what is the highest court in the land? If you said the basketball court above the Supreme Court, you are correct. Yes, this is in fact the basketball court that is above the Supreme Court of the United States. There is a gym up there, and part of the gym is a basketball court. Second, are pickles a fruit or a vegetable? If you said that they are a fruit of the vine, you are correct. According to a case heard by the U.S. Supreme Court, they ruled that pickles are in fact fruit of the vine, just like a tomato. 3, where did the Supreme Court hold its first sessions until there was space built in the old Senate chambers? And if you answered in the bar, you are correct. They used to hold their cases in a bar. So the Marshall Court, this is John Marshall. He was the 4th Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, serving from 1801 to 1835. Why is he important? Because he strengthened the power of the Supreme Court. That is what he was known for. And he did that through ruling on a variety of Supreme Court cases that really helped define the role of the Supreme Court and give the Supreme Court its powers. He did this with Marbury versus Madison, McCulloch versus Maryland, and Gibbons versus Ogden. The first case, Marbury versus Madison. I'm going to start off by asking you as a separate question. The right to bear arms. It's a right given in the U.S. Constitution, but it just says that we have the right to bear arms. So what exactly does that mean? And does that mean that everybody can have a gun? Can they have whatever gun they want? Ultimately, it's up to the Supreme Court to decide. And how they decide is when local governments or cities or states make a law on gun laws. That law stands until it's challenged in the Supreme Court. So if nobody has a problem with that law will be the law. If somebody has an issue with that law, because this is a constitutional issue on the right to bear arms, they can technically sue the state or city and bring that all the way up to the Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to decide. And we've seen this happen multiple times, especially in major cities like Washington, D.C. and Chicago. Why do they do this? Why does the Supreme Court do this? It's because the Supreme Court has the power to determine what the Constitution means. So since this is specifically in the Constitution, the Supreme Court has the right to say if a law made by a state or a city is constitutional or unconstitutional. The reason why they have this right is because of the Supreme Court case Marbury versus Madison. This is one of the most important cases of all time. You are going to read about this case because it's fairly complex and explaining it in a PowerPoint doesn't seem sufficient. So there's a reading that you will do that will explain the details of this case a little bit more significantly. But what you need to know is that this case established what we call judicial review. And what judicial review says is that the Supreme Court gets to determine what is constitutional. They interpret the Constitution and determine what it means. So if you look at the judges on the Supreme Court, you have what we call strict constitutionalists, and they take the Constitution as it is, word for word. And then you have interpretists, and they are the ones that interpret what the Constitution means and applies it to more of a modern day society. So take a chief or a justice like Justice Thomas, for example. Justice Clarence Thomas is more of a strict constitutionalist. He takes the meaning of the Constitution literally, versus somebody like Justice Ginsburg, who is going to interpret it and apply it to today's society. This also allows the judicial branch or the Supreme Court to stop the executive and legislative branches from going against the Constitution. So this is an example of a checks and balance so that the judicial branch or so that the executive and legislative branches can't pass whatever laws they want to. McCulloch versus Maryland is the second case that we are going to talk about today. And this is where Congress established a federal bank and placed that branch of the bank in Baltimore. Baltimore wasn't happy about it. They did not want a bank from Congress there. And so they decided they would tax the bank. If the bank is going to be there, they're going to tax it. So the issue was, did the Constitution allow Congress to start a bank? The Supreme Court determined, yes, it is necessary and proper for the U.S. government to have a federal bank. So then the second question was, if they could have a state bank, or have a bank, could the state tax a bank that was part of the federal government? And the Supreme Court decided no. Federal law shall be the Supreme Court, or the supreme law of the land. So in this case, if the federal government isn't going to tax that bank, then the states don't have the right to tax that bank. And since this is a federal court, it is above the state law. Finally, Gibbons versus Ogden. This was an argument over rights to operate steamboats in New York and New Jersey. So essentially what was happening is you had steamboats going through between New Jersey State and New York State, and who had the right to operate those steamboats. The issue for the Supreme Court was, does the federal government have the power to regulate commerce inside of a state? So we know that it had the right to regulate interstate commerce, but does it have the right to regulate the commerce or the business activity within its own state? The Supreme Court said yes. Essentially what they said was, yes, Congress has that power to do between the two states, but if Congress can't also regulate what's happening inside of the state, it's not going to be able to regulate between two states. So this led us to the Supremacy Clause, saying laws of the federal government are superior to those of the state governments. And that is it for today.